Hey everybody. What I want to talk about now is the idea of negative correlation. And negative correlation is the opposite of positive correlation. And in negative correlation, what we see is an interesting fact. We see that as one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. So this is going to produce a different kind of scatter plot. Can you think of any type of relationship that would produce negative correlation? So you're thinking of a situation where as you increase one of the variables, the other variable goes and decreases. Let me give you an example of something that might work like that. So I'll draw out a XY axis. And why don't I just try to make that a little straighter? Okay, so let's go like this, go like this. And why don't we put cups of coffee? Now, when you have cups of coffee, what does it do to you? Number of cups of coffee. It makes you more awake, right? So if you have a lot of cups of coffee, you're going to be having caffeine, which will make you more awake. And then how about over here, what we'll do is we'll put hours of sleep. So hours of sleep. Okay, hours of sleep. And what we'll do is we'll move that over here and we'll go like this. So now that we've got our hours of sleep on the y-axis and we've got our number of cups of coffee on the x-axis, maybe we could just make a rough scale of the situation, right? For example, you might say that a good starting plot would be to say, 0 cups of coffee. That's always a good thing to start out with whenever you draw these types of graphs, right? So 0 cups of coffee, and right here. Right? And then, I don't know, we'll just move up to the end here and say something ridiculous like 20. Right? I don't think there'd be anybody taking 20 cups of coffee, but let's just imagine that, that would be the upper end of our scale. Same thing for hours of sleep. You get 0 hours sleep. Can you imagine somebody who had 20 cups of coffee and 0 hours of sleep? That would not be the kind of person you'd want to hang around with on a Monday morning, I think. They might scare the bejeebers out of you. And then how about 10 hours of sleep as our upper end, okay? And so what kind of observations may we see? Do you think that the person who did have 20 cups of coffee, if that person is actually out there and existed, that they would get much sleep? I'd hazard a guess and probably say no, right? But the person who had 0 cups of coffee might get a lot of sleep. So we would put somebody up here. What we would find is something like this. We would find that as you have more cups of coffee, your hours of sleep tends to decrease. And so what we see is a downward trend. We see a graph that as you look at it, as the number of cups of coffee goes up, the hours of sleep goes down. So the important conclusion that we can draw out of this graph is something along the lines of the trend goes down and to the right, and so negative correlation shows a trend that goes down to the right. Okay, so let's write that in just as an added fact. Okay, if one variable is going up and the other is going down, that will mean therefore negative correlation shows a trend that goes down and to the right. And remember, that's the opposite of positive correlation, because positive correlation goes up and to the right. Right? We want to remember that fact because that is an important fact that we also want to remember. Positive correlation goes up and to the right in a trend that looks like that. A negative correlation goes down and to the right in a trend that looks like that. Okay, so positive, negative. Okay. All right, so I hope you found that helpful. The next thing we'll talk about is no correlation.